It is Sunday morning, and I'm going to try to read so that I can get it posted at a decent time tomorrow, because I know you guys love hearing it. And it might take me I've got a busy day tomorrow, so I'm afraid I wouldn't get to it till later. So I thought I'd better try to get it done today. I need my glasses on. There we go. All right. Chapter 23, A Bumpy Ride. "No," said Rose. "Send him away. I would rather meet an unwashed ogre in an underground cavern." Goodness, was I to say that to his face? And then Sally burst into the drawing room, flustered and pink-cheeked. "Sorry, ma'am, but Leonard has come back, ma'am. Mr. Standfast left his case behind here in the drawing room, and Leonard's to fetch it. It's needed at the jail, ma'am." Leonard stood behind her, mopping his face with his cap, and then Mr. Roddy Fusswell pushed him aside and pushed Sally, too, striding into the room as if he were king of the world. "Rose," he said, "what are you doing? Oh, what are you doing here?" cried Rose. "Go away." "Listen to me," he said. "I will not," said Rose. "That smirking shrimp of a reporter made a mash of my words." Rose tried to duck around him. "We can take Mr. Standfast's case," I said. "We're going to see Miss Marianne now." "The innocent Miss Marianne," said Rose, glaring at Roddy Fusswell. "Would that be the case in question?" She pointed to a sturdy leather box with a worn handle sitting beside the chair that Mr. Standfast had used. "That's it," said Granny Jane. "The poor man? I expect it holds all the documents pertaining to your family's history, Rose dear. Not something to be mislaid." Being nearest, she stooped to pick it up. "Let me help," said Leonard from the doorway. "I'll take that." Roddy Fusswell's long arm reached in front of Granny Jane and clutched the handle. Rose yelped like a puppy whose paw had been stepped upon. "Let go this instant!" She tried to wrest the case from his grasp, nearly toppling Granny at the same time. Leonard was somehow part of the middle, too, and nearly caught Granny before she went over. "Stop this at once!" Mummy stamped her foot in a most un-mummy-like way. The grandfather clock ticked loudly in the sudden quiet before Rose gave the case a sharp tug and won her prize. "Thank you," she said. "Mrs. Morton, I am borrowing your daughter for a mission of mercy. Leonard will meet you outside in a moment." Rose, so bold, she had not even asked for permission, but had informed my mother of the plan. Leonard hesitated and then withdrew. I tried to follow Rose's lead. "Leonard is driving." "Rose," said Roddy Fusswell. Rose raised her hand. "I am too angry to listen to you just now. Please do not speak to me." My chest swelled with admiration. How able she was. Rose clamped the case between her calves and jammed her arms into the sleeves of her jacket. "Have you got what's needed, Aggie?" "Oh, the letter from Fairplay. I did not." "I'll just fetch my—" I slid into the hallway to retrieve the all-important paper from inside my skate. But where were my skates? I'd dropped them on the floor by the stairs when I'd come in. "Miss!" Someone was hissing at me. "Sally, did you move my skates?" "In the closet, miss. I tidied them out of the way, but miss—" I swished aside coats to find my skates in their bulky case lying atop the row of overshoes. "Miss, listen! Please, there's a boy." The first skate was empty. I crammed my hand into the other one. It was empty, too. I swung around and scrambled on the hall carpet to see if the letter had fallen out. "Miss!" "Sally, there was a paper inside my skate." My nose began to tingle, a sure sign that tears were next. "You must help me find it." "This one, miss?" Sally pulled a crumpled but familiar and oh so beautiful folded page from the pocket of her apron. "I was taking it down to the kitchen fire, miss. Here you go." Oh my God, she almost burned it up. That would have been absolutely horrible, right? I snatched the letter and shoved it into the pocket of my dress. I plucked my coat from its hook and pulled on my beret. "But, miss, I've been trying to tell you, there's a boy in the kitchen and he's—" I sprang upright. "You mean Hector?" "He's dripping wet, miss, ever so consternated, what with his shoes having gotten so waterlogged. We've given him a cup of broth and dry socks, but he wanted me to ask you what happens next." I leaned against the wall, muddling the buttons on my coat. What happens next? Here she goes daydreaming. Or trying to write, whatever it does she does in her head. The suspect had wrestled with the lovely heiress for possession of a case full of incriminating evidence. Where would his next move take him? The intrepid refugee, hardened by the difficulties of his escape from oppression, was determined to follow wherever he must, through rain or snow or dark of night. The devoted sleuth would accompany the heiress in her pursuit of the family honor, taking her, "Miss Aggie! Most urgent," he says. "Tell him the caterpillar is on the move. Tell him I've gone with Rose to the police station, but he should stick with the caterpillar. Have you got that, Sally?" Sally wrinkled her nose and went through to the kitchen, shaking her head. Rose came out of the drawing room with Mr. Fusswell and Mummy so close behind as baby ducks. "There you are," said Rose. "Rose," said Roddy Fusswell. "Rose, dear," said Mummy. "Listen to me," said Roddy. "I don't understand," said Mummy, "why you feel it necessary that Agatha accompany—" "Mummy, yes," I said. "I've promised. Rose needs company. You'd never wish me to break a promise." "Rose," said Roddy again. Rose ignored him and spoke to Mummy. "Mrs. Morton," she said, "Aggie is a favorite of my aunt. She will be the ideal companion." "But to a prison?" Mummy had a familiar wobble in her voice. "Prison?" said Roddy Fusswell. The door to the kitchen passage opened and Leonard poked his head through. "It's not right for a girl to visit a prison unaccompanied," said Roddy Fusswell. "I insist on, which is why Aggie is coming with me," said Rose. "Leonard, would you assist Mr. Fusswell with his coat? He'll be leaving shortly." Yes, miss." Leonard scooped up the coat from where Roddy had draped it on the newel post. Offered his hat from the stand. "Give me that." Roddy jammed the hat on his head. He snarled at Leonard to move off, that he could put on his own blinking coat. Mummy was at risk of wringing her hands into rags, but I resolved not to be deterred in my mission. I kissed her. Leonard turned to Rose, but kept his eyes on the floor. "The horse and cart are waiting, miss. Mr. Standfast was most urgent in his request." "We'll come now," said Rose. "Mrs. Morton, you've been most kind. I'm sorry you're being left with—" She tipped her head toward Roddy Fusswell, who had made no effort to put on his coat, but was brooding in a corner of the foyer. "Take an umbrella," Mummy offered Papa's large black one from the stand by the door, and Rose thanked her. "Do watch out for Agatha," said Mummy. "Are we all set?" asked Rose in a whisper. "You've got—" I nodded. We stepped out into the night. "Where's my blasted glove?" said Roddy Fusswell as the door closed. Rose began to giggle. "We've escaped," she cried. Leonard helped us into the cart. "Hold this." Rose handed over Mr. Standfast's case. "I'll just get the umbrella up. I didn't think about your cart not having a roof." "Let me take the case," said Leonard. "No, thank you, Leonard," said Rose. "We'll look after it." "The gent asked most particular that I bring it." "Goodness, this case is causing full-fledged battles in Torquay this evening," said Rose. "You are bringing it safe and sound, Leonard, with me attached." "Just drive," I said. "Rose's aunt is waiting in a prison cell for a crime she did not commit." Leonard shook the reins and Belle began to walk. Our good cheer faded. A steady breeze was bringing in fog, even all these hills away from the sea. Rose, with the umbrella, fighting to hold it at an angle that would protect us from the rain. "Even a brawly conspires to make life difficult," she muttered, and then was silent for several minutes as Belle clopped carefully over slick cobblestones. Even a brawly, B-R-O-L-L-Y. We can look that up. B-R-O-L-L-Y. Even a brawly conspires to make life difficult. When Rose spoke again, I cupped a hand behind my ear to show that I could not hear. Rose raised her voice. "She may have wished my mother dead 100 times, but she never would have killed her. Aunt Marianne is a gentle soul, except on the topic of the vote. It was my mother who carried bitterness in her heart." She put a hand on Leonard's shoulder. "Even if you can vouch for that, can you not? I saw you with her on the Strand last week, both scowling like spoiled children." "Leonard?" I said. "Why did you have cause to speak to Rose's mother in the High Street?" "I didn't." Leonard flicked the switch against Belle's backside and glanced over. "She bumped into me outside the post office. She trod on my toe." "Is that what happened?" said Rose. "I was inside posting a letter. I didn't see a collision, only her scolding you and you barking back." Good for him, I thought. About time she made to drink a bit of her own medicine. I gasped, and Rose went silent. How horribly close to the fact of things. "So, do y'all remember what the letter said?" I don't know if I can find it that fast. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, I'm close. Wait, I better put my I'm going to lose my spot if I don't. Okay, she's got the new clue there. Oh, good grief. Oh, here it is. Okay. Please, this was the letter that she's taking, right? Oh, the sun got bright all of a sudden. Please be informed that you are not the first child of your parents' union. They hid a baby before you were born. Excuse me. Is this a secret you can live with? Meet at Torrey Abbey, 5 o'clock Sunday. Should we not inherit together? From Fair Play. So, and I was thinking it said for them to meet at High Street or something, but it said to meet at Torrey Abbey. So that doesn't really have anything to do. I thought maybe he and the two of them had met each other. You know, like they were, like she was the one that the letter was supposed to go to, and it was from Leonard or something. But I must be wrong. Okay, that's not what Rose said. Forgive me. That was thoughtless. She went on more quietly. Mama was in a foul mood afterward about strange young men getting in the way. A bit extreme, now that Leonard has explained. Rose's voice caught, and I knew she was crying. So many sour encounters, she said. All these years of living with Auntie Em, and never a kind word. How miserable breakfast must have been at Evermore, I thought. After a few more damp and silent minutes, we arrived at the police station. Thank you, Leonard. Rose closed the umbrella and laid it on the seat. I can carry the case for you, miss, said Leonard. Don't be silly, said Rose. I'm perfectly capable. Find a sheltered place to wait. We shan't be too long. I shouldn't think they'll let us linger. We clambered down to the pavement and hurried inside. I feel like Leonard's taking a little too much interest in the case, though. Don't you? He keeps trying to take it, even from like all the way back in the parlor at the house. Dodging raindrops, said Rose, laughing, switching Mr. Standfast's case from one hand to the other. An officer sat behind a desk, brass buttons straining to keep his jacket closed over his tummy. A nameplate by his elbow announced his name as Constable Lloyd Rushton, the man who had embarrassed Hector, I realized. Your Mr. Standfast has gone to supper, he told us. Up at the Crown and Cushion is where I recommended. Only one of you at a time is allowed to see the prisoner. Dangerous villain like her, eh? He grinned. That is not the slightest bit funny, said Rose. You go ahead. I said, no, said Rose. She's wanting whatever it is that you've brought. You go first. I'll find Mr. Standfast. She leaned over and kissed my cheek. Let's see if we can bring her home tonight. The officer sighed and heaved himself up. He motioned for me to come along. More than a little nervous, I waved goodbye to Rose and followed the constable's wide, navy blue backside down a narrow corridor. Chapter 24. Ooh, this is an interesting title. A Painful Confession. I held my breath, intent on believing the words that churned inside my head. I will not be afraid. I will not be afraid. I will not. The constable stopped at a door covered with chipped brown paint. He gave the knob a hefty wrench and it squealed open. We seemed to be looking straight into a black velvet curtain. He unhooked a torch from where it hung on a nail inside the door. He pressed a button on its side and it lit up like magic. It was the same sort of torch used by Constable Beck on his night patrol. Dull silver with a strong beam that illuminated a steep set of stairs leading down into a pit of darkness. Ugh, a cellar of gloom, an impenetrable night. Apparently they were keeping poor Miss Marianne in a dungeon. By the time we reached the bottom step, my hand was covered in grime from the banister. Enough lamps burned down here to see without the torch, but the ceiling was so low that I could have touched it with an outstretched arm. The smell was like old socks and vinegar. An officer sat on a wooden chair, chipping at a piece of soap with a knife. Miss Marianne, separated by a wall of iron bars, perched on a stool with her back to the guard. Abby sees a dog. She's getting ready to start barking. Hold on. Abby! Abigail! Abby! Come on. Come back up here. Come on. Oh, she's so ignoring me. Oh, there she goes. She better not fall into the water. If she does, I'm going to scream. Now she's barking. Silly dog. I had to put her all the way inside. She wouldn't stop barking. All right, back to a painful confession. She had just gotten down to the basement. She could see Miss Mary Ann. The constable who had brought me this far spoke to the other fellow. Might as well have come have your tea break, Smithers. The prisoner's not going anywhere, and neither is the girlie unless she wants to fight the rats on her way out. Rats? He was teasing, wasn't he? Aggie? Miss Mary Ann stood as the two policemen shuffled back up the steps. Her face was gray-hued, the blood gone from her lips. Her hazel eyes, usually sparkling, were dull and wary, and her hair. Usually she wore a tidy dancer's knot at the nape of her neck. She may have spent the afternoon tearing at it with both hands, the way it straggled out like an unkempt straw. A place like this was designed to scare a person to bits, and it worked. What words of comfort could I invent? My dear child, Miss Mary Ann touched my fingertips through the bars. I've brought your letter. I passed the folded paper. It isn't mine. She unfolded the page and tilted it toward the weak gas jet in the corner of her cell. When she looked at me again, her eyes were moist. I know you didn't kill her, I cried. You never would. Thank you for saying that, Aggie. Miss Mary Ann squeezed her eyes shut, causing tears to roll down her pale cheeks. Is this a secret you can live with? She read the letter shaking in her hand. I did not write this, nor was it meant for me to read. The envelope was addressed to Rose. But Irma didn't like Rose to receive letters from strangers. She opened it herself and felt entirely justified, since she had saved her daughter from seeing such a thing. I held my breath as Miss Mary Ann leaned against the bars as close as she could get to where I stood. They might end our visit at any time, said Miss Mary Ann, and you deserve to know. Another minute passed while I watched resolve and indecision take turns upon her face. Finally, as if diving into a cold lake from which there would be no easy exit, she began, I believe that this letter was written by someone I lost long ago. I think my own child killed Irma as a result of a terrible mistake. She did not wait for me to collect my wits, which now was scattered on the floor. She had jumped into the water and would swim with no rest until she reached the other side. Long ago, I had a sweetheart. A sweetheart? His name was Otis Connor. He was a horseman in the Royal Guard, though he thought one day he'd like to be a veterinary doctor. My brother, Giles, Rose's father, was thankfully pleased with my choice. Our parents were dead, and Giles was all the family left to me. It mattered, you see, even more than it does now. A woman rarely trusted to decide the path of her own life, just like we've talked about in the ancient civilizations, right? They usually didn't get to choose who they wanted to marry, but the fathers of the household chose for them, right? Otis and I were married. I had a gorgeous dress, which had been my mother's. But then, Otis belonged to a regiment of the army that went suddenly to the Sudan to squelch a rebellion. After he'd gone, I discovered that I was pregnant. I wrote to him at once. I believed the news would bring him joy while away fighting. Within a few days, I received a telegram that he had been killed in the battle at Kortum. Tears sprang to my eyes. Oh, no. So sad. How inadequate were words. Sad for a whole life gone and another changed forever. 2 lives changed, and now a baby to consider. The baby in the letter belonged to Miss Mary Ann. She wiped her eyes. Let me tell you a bit more, she said. I have thought nothing else of how this dreadful mistake occurred. My brother Giles had just been married to Irma, and he knew that losing Otis had broken my heart. But he was dismayed about the baby. It is not good news for a baby to be born when there was no husband left. You know, in those days, it was totally different. So even though she had been married, it was her, she would have been young with a baby and no husband, and people just didn't like that, okay? She closed her eyes again, her voice low and a little hurried. Giles had offered to adopt the baby, she said. Now, Giles is her brother, but that's Rose's dad and Irma Eversham's husband, right? Okay? He and Irma would raise it as their own child. Such a relief. Her brother's suggestion meant that she would not lose the child entirely. Rose is your baby? I said. No, Miss Mary Ann shook her head. Not Rose. The ending was not so simple as that. Irma Eversham's opinion was firm and furious. No child born out of her marriage would she adopt and raise as her own. She threatened Giles with ending their marriage if she made him. She was not a nice lady, even from the very beginning, was she? Giles was torn apart, Miss Mary Ann said. He wanted to help his sister, but how could he go to war against his bride? Miss Mary Ann resolved speedily that she did not want her baby raised by such a heartless woman as Irma Eversham. She and her brother agreed that he would find a home far away to take the child, and so he did, settling matters with the help of his solicitor so that Miss Mary Ann did not know where her baby's home would be. She never even looked into the infant's eyes before he was whisked away by the nurses. Her brother Giles paid a monthly allowance for his care. Life continued as it had before Otis O'Connor had come into Miss Mary Ann's world. She resigned herself to the captain's spinster sister and remained living in the house where she'd grown up, though now she was the guest of her brother's new wife, the critical and bad-tempered Irma. A year later, baby Rose had been born, bringing renewed joy to her auntie's spirit, but also a reminder of her harrowing loss. So basically, she just kind of forgot all about her marriage, forgot all about the baby. He just put it behind them, acted like it never even happened, and so that people didn't talk about her in town because she had a baby with no father living. Miss Mary Ann stopped talking. She fetched a tin cup from the floor next to the cot. She pointed to a bucket of murky water beside the guard's chair where I might fill it up. And you never knew what happened to your baby boy? I had not missed Miss Mary Ann's revelation. He was whisked away by the nurses before he ever looked into his mother's eyes. By now, her baby boy was nearly a man, a year older than Rose. We did not speak of him again, said Miss Mary Ann. The solicitor placed him... Excuse me. Something's blowing around out here that's making me sneeze. The solicitor placed him with parents wanting to adopt a child. Even Giles did not know where the boy was raised, and never told Irma that he paid an allowance for all those years. She'd have hated me more, and what if she found a way to put a stop to it? I wanted the child looked after, safe and beloved. When he reached 18, the payments would end. Her voice broke. We would never meet him, she whispered, nor celebrate those birthdays with him. I bit my lip, sharing the weight of Miss Mary Ann's unbearable sorrow. My papa would not have another birthday. For those of us left behind, his day in March would be one of loss instead of celebration. And then my brother died, said Miss Mary Ann. All this awful remembering. She took a sip of water and hurried on. Irma had been livid to discover after her husband's death that he had been paying for Mary Ann's baby all these years. The captain's will made no provision for the boy beyond a very small legacy. Irma instructed the solicitor to inform the family that payments had ceased a few months early because of Giles's death. I did not like to say it, but this is where the confusion began, is it not? That was Aggie asking Mary Ann. It must be. Miss Mary Ann's voice was hollow, as if creeping up from a deep hole. She raised her hand, still holding the letter from Fair Play. I think this was written by my son. He does not know the circumstances of his birth. His words suggest that he believes himself to be Rose's brother, that Giles was his father and not just an uncle, that Irma was his mother, not I. That's what he means by inheriting, I said. Yes. But Rose never read it? Said she didn't have a chance to make things right? If Mrs. Eversham hadn't stolen the letter, she would likely still be alive. And if Miss Mary Ann had not ripped the letter from the dying woman's clasp and hidden it, if she had told the facts to the police about her baby, she might not be in this jail cell. Rose does not know the truth, said Miss Mary Ann. I never told her. It was a secret that Irma and I meant to take to our graves. A chill prickled my neck as if a ghost were breathing ice my way. And that's exactly what she did, I said. And so I shall not, said Miss Mary Ann. How wretched that my own son... She broke off, too choked by tears to finish the unsayable sentence. One thing was certain. Roddy Fuswell was not Miss Mary Ann's son and not the killer. The Fuswell family was well known in Torquay. Roddy had lived here at the Royal Victoria Hotel The whole of his life, not hidden in some distant town, adopted by parents that no one knew. I should be looking for a stranger. My fist tightened around the bars of the cell, as if I might squeeze them to cinders. My mind flew to the pale, smirking face of Mr. Augustus Fibley, his raspy voice and cocksure manner. When had he moved to town? And where had he come from? "Can you tell me what happened on Saturday?" I said. "Had Mr. Fibley's visit overlapped with Mrs. Eversham? Had he gone into the pantry for some reason?" When Irma appeared so distraught, I feared that some great harm had befallen Rose. The studio was buzzing, as you know, but Irma thought her news so urgent that she did not wait to discuss it privately. She said that she was guarding her daughter's life from the shame I'd cursed her with, that the letter amounted to blackmail, and we must go at once to the police. Her face was bright red, the letter trembling in her hand. "Who else was there?" I asked. The Reverend had been up and down the stairs with 2 volunteers for half the morning, and they were carrying out the last of those boxes when Irma came, and several armloads besides. Roddy Fusswell took the tea urn and the cups, but he missed the sugar bowl sitting in the pantry waiting to be washed. Your garden boy came to fetch the floral arrangements. The reporter chap came by to find the case for his spectacles, which had been dropped under a chair. I caught my breath. "When exactly did Mr. Fibley come?" I said. "Do you remember? Well, let me think a moment. He had held the door for Mr. Fusswell, so he was coming in as... But was that the first trip down the stairs, or..." My mind was skipping about, uncovering further facts. Augustus Fibley worked for the Torquay Voice. Their play had used letters cut from the pages of a newspaper. "Miss Mary Ann," I said, "do you suppose..." A sudden burst of footsteps thudded on the stairs. "What the devil's going on?" Mr. Standfast appeared from the darkened stairwell. "I've been waiting over at the Crown and Cushion eating a rather stringy chop. I sent that boy for my valet more than an hour ago, and he still hasn't come back." "But Rose has your case, sir." A wave of apprehension swept up my arms like a rash. "I came down here to see Miss Mary Ann, and Rose was going straight away to find you." "Have a look about for her, would you, Miss Morton?" said the lawyer. "I have a great deal to discuss here with Miss Eversham, and my papers would be very useful." I said goodbye to Miss Mary Ann, but did not wish her a peaceful night, as that seemed like wasted words. She waved the letter a small white flag to say her thanks. I set my feet upon the steps with an aching heart and a shiver of worry. If Rose had not gone to meet Mr. Standfast, wherever could she be? Oh dear. That does not make sense, does it? But that's the end of the chapter.